Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. We have an exclusive one-on-one interview with Alberta Premier Danielle Smith, who addressed a number of hot-button issues which are impacting Albertans. U.S. President Joe Biden speaks out about the blast at a hospital in Gaza, which has claimed almost 500 lives. And the Interfaith Food Bank here in Lethbridge was recognized as a 5-star Top 100 charity. We have the details.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. Alberta government officials say they're working on ways to provide Albertans with better access to family doctors and healthcare professionals. Health Minister Adriana LaGrange says they'll be moving forward with recommendations made by a range of groups on an advisory panel. Now, some of the recommendations include creating a primary healthcare division within Alberta Health, working with the Alberta Medical Association to create a task force to recommend a new payment model for physicians, and the doctors will be paid fairly.
We are taking other immediate actions as well, including providing $57 million over 3 years to family physicians and nurse practitioners with the initial support they need to help manage their increasing number of patients. This funding is worth up to $10,000 each year for an individual physician. I know for many family physicians, this initial investment is an important first step in stabilization.
Alberta Premier Danielle Smith says the Supreme Court of Canada's recent ruling on Ottawa's Bill C-69, which was deemed unconstitutional, was a big win for our province. The bill sought to regulate activities within provincial jurisdiction. Premier Smith says this is something Federal Environment Minister Stephen Guilbeault is going to have to deal with.
The federal government needs to read the case. They need to make sure that they're internalizing what it says, because it was a pretty harsh ruling. It essentially says they've been acting illegally for the last 4 years. They've been now operating outside the Constitution, which is the highest law in the land, and they have an expectation of cooperative federalism. That's the principle on which our country's built. And I can tell you that we will be invoking and waving around that Supreme Court judgment every time the federal government steps out of their lane.
Make sure you catch the full exclusive one-on-one interview with Premier Danielle Smith and myself coming up after Business News. We discuss a host of hot-button issues you won't want to miss. Manitoba's newest Premier, Wab Kinew, and his Executive Council were sworn in on Wednesday. Kinew led the NDP to a crushing victory in the October 3rd provincial election, defeating Heather Stephenson and the PC party.
I, Wabanakwit Kinew, do solemnly swear that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to His Majesty King Charles III, his heirs and successors, according to law, so help me God. I, Wabanakwit Kinew, do solemnly swear that I will duly, faithfully, and to the best of my knowledge and ability perform and fulfill duties and requirements of the office of Executive Councillor for the province of Manitoba, to which I have been appointed, and so long as I shall continue to hold that office without fear or favor, so help me God.
Kinew becomes the 25th Premier of Manitoba. Federal Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre rose in the House of Commons to say that Canadians continue to struggle financially and that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is, quote, not worth the cost. Poilievre says the massive spending by the Trudeau Liberals continues to hurt so many Canadians.
He massively increased the money supply by $600 billion, inflating housing costs by over 100%. That forced one C-SPAN shipyard worker I met last week to buy a normal house for over $1 million. And now interest rates have gone up because of inflationary deficits, something the Prime Minister promised would not happen. And he's forced to pay $7,500 a month on his mortgage while supporting his 3 kids. Will the Prime Minister reverse his inflationary spending so that this gentleman and his wife and 3 kids can afford to keep their home?
The cuts, the austerity that are proposed by the leader of the official opposition would not help that family, would not help Canadians from coast to coast be able to afford a new home. That is or the homes they're living in even. That is why we're continuing to work right across the country to bring forward ambitious some community-specific solutions to the housing problems they're facing. We've signed housing accelerator fund agreements with London, with Vaughan, with Halifax, with Hamilton, with the province of Quebec, with more to come, Mr. Speaker. The cuts he's proposing won't help Canadians. Our investments, done responsibly, will continue to help Canadians.
That's right. Here.
Well, we saw lots of clouds and showers earlier today in Lethbridge in southwestern Alberta. Jeanette Rocher is now with a quick peek at the forecast. Jeanette, for the short term and temperature-wise, we should be quite nice across much of southwestern Alberta?
Yes, for the very short term, Hal. So let's get out and enjoy it, shall we? Because we have a beautiful forecast in store for us on Thursday. We're looking at a high of 24 degrees, sunshine. The only thing about it, though, is the wind. Both tonight and into Thursday, we're looking at winds from the west with gusts up to 50 and even 70 kilometers per hour. So bye-bye leaves. That's all I can say about that, other than I'll be back later in the show to give you the dreaded news that we could be seeing flurries early next week. Hal?
Ouch. Okay, thanks so much, Jeanette. U.S. President Joe Biden's trip to Tel Aviv has prompted Israel to allow humanitarian aid to begin flowing into Gaza from Egypt. The supplies, however, are subject to inspections and must go to civilians and not Hamas terrorists. Biden cautioned Israel against reacting to the atrocities by Hamas with all-consuming rage. He compared the attacks by the terrorist group to the September 11, 2001 attacks on the United States. U.S. President Joe Biden also says data from the U.S. Defense Department shows the blast at a hospital in Gaza, which reportedly killed around 500 people, was likely not a strike by the Israeli military.
I was deeply saddened and outraged by the explosion at the hospital in Gaza yesterday. And based on what I've seen, it appears as though it was done by the other team. Terrorist group Hamas has slaughtered, as has been pointed out, over 1,300 people. And it's not hyperbole to suggest slaughtered. And including 31 Americans as part of that. And they've taken scores of people hostage, including children. You said, imagine what those children hiding from Hamas were thinking. It's beyond my comprehension to be able to imagine what they're.
Protesters in support of Palestinians clashed with security forces in the capital city of Beirut, Lebanon. Many were protesting the blast at the hospital and the ongoing support of the United States' war for Israel. Both water cannons and tear gas were used to try and disperse the crowd. Fireworks and smoke could be seen as protesters clashed with security personnel. Lebanese security were forced to repel protesters as fires broke out near a number of embassies. Around 3,000 Palestinians have been killed in Israeli attacks since the October 7th Hamas terrorist attack inside of Israel, which left 1,400 others dead. Political reporter and Sun columnist Brian Lilley says all party leaders in Canada, except the NDP's Jagmeet Singh, called Hamas terrorists. Mr. Lilley says the party appears to have a bit of an anti-Semitic problem.
Jagmeet Singh conspicuously wasn't there. It was Edmonton MP for the NDP, Heather McPherson, that stood up. And she gave a pretty good speech, but you know, there are people in the party who have been calling out McPherson since the weekend for being a sellout. So the NDP has an anti-Semitism problem. It has a problem with people who believe that Hamas are freedom fighters, that this is a decolonization struggle. And so all those DEI words that we've been hearing about thrown into training sessions and, you know, into affirmations that are said before meetings, those are coming back to bite the NDP.
Catch the full interview with the always colorful Brian Lilley coming up in the second half of our program. Now, NDP leader Jagmeet Singh did, however, say that this is a scary time for Jewish Canadians as the war between Israel and Hamas continues in Gaza.
This is probably one of the first times one of the folks I met was a colleague of mine from law school, mentioned that in his entire adult life, he's never seen the fear and the worry that Jewish Canadians are experiencing right now. I heard from a member of CJ who talked about his son being told not to wear a shirt from the school he attends because it would identify him as Jewish. I heard young people mentioning that they were told that they couldn't talk about what was going on in their schools, that they're worried about their safety. I heard parents tell me stories about having to make tough decisions about not sending their kids to school. This should not happen. This should not happen in Canada. This should not happen anywhere in the world. It is wrong, and I'm deeply sorry. That's what the Jewish community is experiencing right now.
Dozens of students from high schools in Regina, Saskatchewan walked out of class in protest of the Saskatchewan government's proposed pronoun legislation. The bill requires parental consent when kids under the age of 16 want to change their names or pronouns at school.
The reason why I walked out of class today was mainly because at the start I just wanted to support the trans community, because it's just very sad what's happening because of everything. But then I started talking to some students inside the school, and there were students that didn't want to come because they were scared that they were going to be outed, because if you leave the school, then you would be skipping your classes and your parents would find out, and they were scared that if they participated in this, that they would be forced to be outed just by doing that. And they're already taking so many precautions just to avoid that, by hiding their name, hiding their pronouns, the name that they've been going by for years now, and it's sad.
Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe says his government will invoke the notwithstanding clause and introduce legislation on the province's pronoun policy in schools. The president of the Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms has spoken out in support of Saskatchewan parents. John Carpe says children should not have the same rights as adults. In fact, Mr. Carpe says kids having adult rights is a perversion of the Charter.
So in a court action that was started by a gay rights group by the name of You Are Pride, they obtained a court injunction to strike down the policy temporarily, and they made the argument that children have some kind of a charter right to withhold secrets from their parents. And the fact is, children are not allowed to drive or vote or get a tattoo or get married or purchase alcohol. And children simply do not have the same charter rights and freedoms that you and I and other adults have. And the role of parents and the right of parents is to nurture and love and protect and guide their own children. And that is both the responsibility that parents have. It's also a charter right of parents to exercise that duty to care and protect for their own children. And so it's very disconcerting that you have a court ruling that says it's okay to keep parents in the dark based on, a very small number of parents that are truly abusive. That's not a good reason to keep all parents in the dark about what's happening with their own kids.
Operation Christmas Child is celebrating its 30th anniversary. Since 1993, Samaritan's Purse has collected more than 200 million shoeboxes to distribute to needy kids around the world. There are even Lethbridge locations where folks can drop off a special shoebox. BCN's Micah Quinn chatted with staff from the Christian organization about how Canadians can pack a box and help put a huge smile on a child's face this Christmas season.
Look at how much they are excited. This is the first time those children are receiving the shoeboxes. They are so happy.
Operation Christmas Child has returned for its 30th year of providing joy to children from around the world. Last year, kids from West Africa, Central America, Ukraine, and the Philippines were given a shoebox. Frank King, the news media relations manager with the organization, says Canadians filled more than 415,000 shoeboxes in 2022.
For some children, these Canadian packed Operation Christmas Child shoeboxes are the first gift of any kind that they will have received in their lives. That means they've never received a Christmas gift, they've never received a birthday gift.
There are currently a few must-have items for each shoebox.
When we ask Canadians to pack shoeboxes, we tell them there's three main things to put in them: school supplies, hygiene items, and toys. We also ask folks to put in a sort of a wow item, something that's a little more substantial maybe, that obviously can still fit in a shoebox, that the kids are going to pull out and go, wow, look at this. Like one cool thing that is a soccer ball. And you deflate it and you put in a little pump with the little pin as well. And then the kids, once they get it, they can inflate the soccer ball and go out and play like right then and there.
Lethbridge residents can drop off a shoebox at Park Meadows Baptist Church and Fresh Life Church, along with the Evangelical Free Church in Tabor. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
By the way, officials with Samaritan's Purse say you can also pack a shoebox online by visiting packabox.ca. The Interfaith Food Bank Society of Lethbridge has been recognized as a 5-star Top 100 charity. Charity Intelligence released its Top 100 list of 2023, and the group says when deciding who makes the list, they use a different tactic, looking more into the charity's results, costs, and impacts. Daniel McIntyre, Executive Director of the Interfaith Food Bank Society of Lethbridge, says the news is exciting and they're thrilled to be recognized for their local efforts.
A lot of times charities get a lot of recognition because they have big, huge marketing campaigns that allow them to be able to be vetted by the community. But including some smaller charities like Interfaith Food Bank in this list is really great because it does speak to the local impact that community donations can have. And I think lately, people are really starting to pay more attention to where they give, and being able to be on a list of those reputable charities with the greatest impact as well as the most accountability to donors is just a wonderful thing for us.
By the way, Canada's over 86,000 registered charities across the country. The Lethbridge disc golf community and family is mourning right now as they've lost a very special player. Scott Jardine was instrumental in helping to keep the sport of disc golf running here in our city. His sister, Lisa Newell, posted on Facebook that her brother's heart failed at the tender age of 51 and he passed away. The Lethbridge Disc Golf Association is hosting a memorial round for Scott at Nicholas Sharon Park on October 22nd at 1 o'clock to honor him. Rebecca Johnson knew Jardine quite well, and she says he'll be sorely missed.
As well as being an integral part of the development of our disc golf scene here in Lethbridge. Scott was someone that many of us considered to be a good friend on and off the course. And we're all very saddened by this news. And so it's been a difficult few days for us, but it's given us a chance to really step back and remember what he did for us and move forward with his legacy in mind.
The Lethbridge Disc Golf Association currently has about 100 members who meet right here in our city. Gary Brown is a City of Lethbridge employee. He works in the city's Parks and Cemeteries Department. Now, Gary is a big fan of Adirondack chairs, emphasis on the word big. He put a number of hours into creating Lethbridge's newest attraction. Here, check this out. Gary created a massive Adirondack chair. Nice color, too. Construction of the chair took around 12 hours to complete, and surprisingly, the lumber investment was only $168. The chair was handcrafted to perfection and will stand as a symbol of leisure and comfort for those seeking a snapshot or wanting to sit down and relax. I guess the only challenge for some may be to climb up into the chair. Great job, Gary Brown. City officials say the chair will be located in one of our main parks here in the city. All you have to do is go out and find it. Well, the rain clouds are leaving us, and we should be going back up to over 20 degrees soon here in southwestern Alberta. A full look at the weather forecast is on deck. It appears as though the rain clouds are dissipating somewhat, and we shall see more sunshine again soon here in Lethbridge. Jeanette Rocher is now with all of the weather details. Jeanette, we had better enjoy the sunshine and warmer temperatures while we still can, because next week we may see some snow.
Oh, you said that dreaded S word. Hell yes. We are looking at flurries later on into next week. Let's hope the forecast changes though before that happens, because look what's happening on Thursday. It's like totally opposite. Summer happening right here. Thursday, high of 24 degrees. High winds though. We're looking at winds from the west with 50 to 70 gusts. 19 for a high on Friday with clear skies. 14 is our expected high on Saturday. Partly cloudy skies, mainly cloudy on Sunday. High of 13 though. So we're still sticking in the teens there for the weekend, which is still relatively seasonable. Not so much as we get into early next week with those single digits there. 6 degrees for a high on Monday, 1 on Tuesday. We are looking at a chance of flurries. Okay, so the average high for this time of year, 14 degrees. Average low, 0. 25 was our record high. That happened back in 2003. Record low on this day was minus 17. That happened back in 1951. Sun rose this morning at 7:57, and we're looking at a sunset this evening at 6:35 p.m. So let's take a look at what's happening on the West Coast. We've got a Pacific weather system that's going to be stalling over the region, bringing in an abundant amount of moisture from the subtropics, so resulting in a sea-to-sky rainfall warning from Squamish all the way to Whistler. And so we're looking at 60 to 120 millimeters of rain. Now in Vancouver alone, we're looking at 50 to 90 millimeters of rain, with the majority of that rain falling in the northern section of the city and also along the coastal region. In Victoria, though, we we are seeing a 40% chance of showers, 16 degrees for both of those cities, 19 for a high in Edmonton with clear skies. Clear skies as well expected in Calgary with also a high of 19 degrees. As we move on over into the rest of the prairies, we're seeing, mainly clear skies as well. 18 for a high in Saskatoon. Beautiful day in Regina. 20, mainly sunny skies there. 15 for a high in Winnipeg. Winnipeg looking at a 30% chance of showers as well. Now, as we switch on over to the central portion of the country, Toronto sitting at 16, partly cloudy skies, high of 15 in Ottawa, 17 for a high. In Montreal, also seeing that mix of sun and cloud there. As we get into Atlantic Canada, let's see what's happening in the Maritimes, shall we? Fredericton, we're seeing a high of 16 degrees, 16 as well for Halifax. Both of those cities seeing partly cloudy skies, 18 for a high in Charlottetown, and at 12 degrees expected to be the high in St. John's, looking at a chance of showers there. There you have it. That is your forecast.
Unifor says contract negotiations with Stellantis got underway on Wednesday. The union set a strike deadline of 11:59 p.m. on October the 29th. The talks with Stellantis come after union members at both Ford and General Motors recently voted in favor of contract terms that Unifor will look to copy. Now, the contracts have so far included base hourly wage increases of nearly 20% for production workers and 25% for skilled trades. They've also included a faster timeline for workers to reach the top wage tier, improvements to pensions, and 2 new paid holidays. A mortgage expert says the real estate industry is likely breathing a huge sigh of relief after Canada's banking regulator signaled it might not move ahead with some proposed tightening of its mortgage lending rules. Mortgage strategist Robert McClister says he agrees with concerns that tougher loan-to-income restrictions could scale back lending. This comes after the Office of the Superintendent of Financial Institutions said in a letter to all federally regulated financial institutions that stakeholders were generally not supportive of additional debt service measures. The annual pace of housing starts in September rose 8% compared to August. Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation says the monthly, seasonally adjusted annual rate of housing starts in September came in at 270,466 units. That is up from 250,383 back in August. The increase came as the annual pace of urban housing starts rose 9% to 250,766 last month. The agency says the annual rate of rural starts was estimated at 19,700 units. Elon Musk's social media platform X has begun charging a $1 fee to new users in the Philippines and New Zealand. It's a test designed to cut down on the spam and fake accounts flourishing on the platform, formerly known as Twitter. The company says it's trying out the annual subscription method for new and unverified accounts. The program, dubbed Not a Bot, will not apply to existing users. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was down 242 points on the day to finish at 19,450. The Dow was down 332 points to 33,665. The S&P 500 was down 58 on the day to 4314, and the Nasdaq was down 219 points to 13,314. West Texas Intermediate Oil was up $1.48 to 88.14 US per barrel. Natural gas was even on the day at 308 US. Gold was also even at 1947.56 US an ounce, and silver was up 2 cents to 22.86 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $9.58 per bushel, barley's at $7.44, canola's at $16.14, and corn is at $8.61 per bushel. Live cattle were up 23 cents to $185.73. Feeder cattle were down $1.68 to $247.13. And lean hogs' December contract was up 48 cents to 68.03. The Canadian dollar was up slightly over the past 24 hours to 72.92 US. Recapping one of our top stories, the war continues between Israel and Hamas in Gaza. Around 35,000 Canadian citizens living in Israel say they're not going anywhere as violence continues in the Middle East. More than 1,300 Canadians have left Israel, however, since the violence escalated. Close to 4,500 people have died on both sides since Hamas attacked southern Israel on October the 7th. Coming up, we have an exclusive one-on-one interview with Alberta Premier Danielle Smith. We chat with the Premier about the recent Supreme Court of Canada's ruling that the No More Pipelines Bill C-69 was ruled unconstitutional. We'll also chat with the Premier about potentially opting out of the Canada Pension Plan for an Alberta Pension Plan, affordable housing, and the new masking mandate from AHS. Catch that informative 15-minute Q&A in just a moment. Listen, when you see news happening in your community, be sure to drop us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. And if you missed any of today's local stories, check out our website, bridgecitynews.ca. The Supreme Court of Canada ruled against Ottawa's Bill C-69, which is the legislation on the environmental effects of major developments. 5 of the 7 judges ruled that most of it was unconstitutional because it seeks to regulate activities within provincial jurisdiction. Now, to chat about this and other hot-button issues which are impacting Albertans is Alberta Premier Danielle Smith, who joins us now from Calgary. Premier Smith, welcome to Bridge City News.
Thanks, Al.
Now, you look at this as a victory, but Federal Environment Minister Stephen Guilbeault says the 5-2 ruling is just the opinions of the judges, and his government's going to, well, we're going to move forward anyway. Your thoughts?
Well, they're wrong. I mean, the way the Supreme Court works is that you, as a province, put forward a reference case to your own Court of Appeal, which we did, and we won that. And then it goes on to the Supreme Court, and we won that as well. And so the federal government needs to read the case. They need to make sure that they're internalizing what it says, because it was a pretty harsh ruling. It essentially says they've been acting illegally for the last 4 years. They've been now operating outside the Constitution, which is the highest law in the land. And they have an expectation of cooperative federalism. That's the principle on which our country is built. And I can tell you that we will be invoking and waving around that Supreme Court judgment every time the federal government steps out of their lane.
So what will this really mean for Alberta's energy sector?
It will mean that, once again, we have the authority to be able to approve our own projects within our own borders. The federal government has a very limited role in being able to do environmental assessments. The court said that if it's a federal project, it has to be on federal land, federally funded, or international. Anything that is within the borders of Alberta, so our oil sands projects, our SAGD projects, if we're developing our generation projects, transmission lines within our province, pipelines within our province, highways within our province, all of those now are firmly within provincial jurisdiction, and we intend to tell the world that Alberta is open for business.
A recent report from the University of Calgary's School of Public Policy says that there really needs to be an inquiry into the actions of the Alberta Energy Regulator. Our province appears to still have a huge orphan well problem. How do you think this will be addressed?
Well, I can tell you I've identified this problem going all the way back to 1997 when I was doing landowner advocacy, and I'm very concerned about it. I'm concerned that landowners will feel like if a company goes bankrupt and they have a bunch of inactive wells, that they're going to be left holding the bag for that. We have a number of projects that were built in even the 50s and the 60s that still haven't been cleaned up. So I've been advocating on this for a very long time. It's part of the reason why I commissioned David Yeager to do a review of our energy policy with the view to how do we accelerate some of this cleanup? How do we get to final reclamation certificates? How do we make sure that landowners get their land back? So we're in the process now of trying to figure out where the problems are at the Alberta Energy Regulator, and it's a little complicated because part of the approval process resides with the Ministry of Environment, part resides with the Ministry of Energy, part of it resides with the regulator. So we're going to have a report that gives us a clearer pathway to how we can make these decisions so that we give not only certainties to the landowners, but also certainty to the companies that when they go through the process of reclamation, it's going to be final and they'll be able to move on to other projects. I think we owe it to everybody to get that process clarified.
Yeah, collaborative effort. Now, your government is spending around $8 million on the ad campaign called Tell the Feds. This is apparently fighting back against the Liberals' clean energy regulations, and you're warning that many people may be in the dark this winter?
Well, I can tell you in Alberta, we might be the early warning sign, because for years we would go and only have maybe one critical alert in a season or one every couple of years. We've had 8 level 3 alerts in the last year. And that means that our power grid is close to failure, to the point where they actually shed people off the grid so that they can maintain the stability. We've seen this in other countries. We've seen it in Germany, we've seen it in Texas, and I can tell you we simply can't put up with it happening here. And part of the reason is that the federal government created so much uncertainty around investing. One of the reasons is the act that was just declared unconstitutional, but it's also the pronouncements that they're making on trying to achieve unrealistic, now unconstitutional targets way too early. The federal environment minister, Stephen Guilbeault, has talked about a net zero power grid by 2035. And I can tell you, it's simply not possible in this province. 90% of our electricity comes from natural gas. We already made a substantial multi-billion-dollar investment of phasing off coal 7 years early. And we need to make sure that we don't have any more stranded assets. We also need to make sure that we are keeping up with the growth in population. We're expecting that our demand for electricity is going to double between now and 2050. And we need to bring on secure supply of baseload power to make sure that the grid doesn't fail. So that's my objective. And I think we now have the constitutional authority to proceed with that. Simply cannot let Albertans be in danger of having an unreliable grid, an unaffordable grid. And we wanted to make sure that the rest of the country understood just how dire it was for us.
You know, you talk about power outages. I remember living in Southern Ontario in Ajax and Hamilton. We used to have rolling brownouts all the time. Just be prepared. You're not going to have any power for like 2 to 3 days. It was incredible. The opposition NDP here in the province has said that our relationship with Ottawa really needs to get better and not so combative so that the two governments can work better together. Now, how can you really have a healthy working relationship with the Trudeau Liberals while also standing up for Albertans, Premier Smith?
Well, I have to tell you, like the NDP allowed for the Constitution to be violated with Bill C-48, Bill C-69, and they did nothing about it. It took us getting into office to fight back against it, and thank heavens we did. Otherwise, we'd still have this unconstitutional act that would be governing our affairs. So I don't think the NDP has any credibility. And my view is I have engaged in cooperative federalism from the very first phone call that I had with Justin Trudeau. I told him I wanted to work with him on carbon neutrality targets by 2050. I told him we were going to create an emissions reduction plan. We did. We released that in April. I asked him if he would work with us at a joint table so that we could come to some agreement about what the milestones should be along the way. And my DMs are in Ottawa as we speak, meeting with them to try to come to those agreements. We had a great relationship during the fires. They were very helpful in making sure that First Nations communities had the evacuation support that they needed, the rebuilding support that they needed. They assisted us with the Canadian Armed Forces fighting. And we also signed a $24 billion healthcare deal that will confirm that we're upholding the principles of the Canada Health Act. So yes, we can work collaboratively. The federal government has to stop picking fights with us. That's the key. If they stop picking fights with us, then we won't have to fight back. We can engage in a spirit of cooperation, but we need a willing partner at the table. And they, on certain issues, have not been a willing or very collaborative partner.
We had federal Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre on our program a few months ago, and we talked extensively about the carbon tax and how it's hurting Canadians. What are you seeing about the impact of the federal carbon tax here in our province in Alberta?
It's doubly devastating because we rely so much on natural gas to heat our homes. And so when people get the double whammy of needing to keep their lights on longer in the wintertime as well as heat their homes, they're getting massive bills. And the number of people who've told me that their carbon tax bill is oftentimes larger than the base cost of gas. That's the reality of what our people here are facing. So I'm supportive of Pierre Poilievre's view that we shouldn't have a retail carbon tax. I think that the great emissions reduction is going to happen with our industrial players, with the oil sands pathways group planning to be net zero by 2050, a petrochemical project, Dow Chemical, talking about net zero petrochemical industry, Air Products, a net zero hydrogen facility. Even Heidelberg is a cement factory. They are building the first net zero cement factory in Edmonton next year. Those are the things that are going to make dramatic emissions reductions. In addition, making sure that we export more clean LNG so that we can replace coal and wood and other polluting fuels internationally. Those are the things that are going to make a major difference. Punishing seniors, low-income people, the most vulnerable, in the dead of winter in January, it's not fair, it's not right. And that's why we believe that the retail carbon tax has got to go.
Finance Minister Nate Horner says if our province does abandon the Canada Pension Plan for an Alberta-made version, it will not adopt Quebec's model. So, Premier Smith, how will Alberta's version be different?
I think people need to first make the decision about whether they want us to have an Alberta pension plan. That's what the reason, I mean, we've had this conversation going on in our province for as long as I can remember. I remember 2001, the firewall letter was written by professors at the University of Calgary, including Stephen Harper, who became prime minister, talking about how do we assert the rights in Alberta the same way Quebec has. Quebec has a pension plan. They have their own collection of taxes. They have their own police force. They manage their own immigration. And so this conversation has been going on for a very long time in Alberta. My predecessor started the process with the Fair Deal panel. The Albertans asked for us to do an analysis. The analysis was done. We've released it, and now it's up to Albertans to tell us if they want to move forward and develop our own pension plan. We wanted them to know what we're entitled to under the Act because we overpay, and those dollars have compounded. We'd be entitled to $334 billion on the basis of the formula that's in statute. And that would allow for us to reduce premiums by $1,400 on employers and employees, as well as increase the amount of money that we're able to give to seniors. But it is up to them. And so that's part of the reason why we put it forward to them. How the money gets invested would be a secondary consideration. I think the main thing that the finance minister was pointing out is that these decisions aren't going to be made by politicians. When you do set up, especially something as important as pension, because we do manage a huge amount of pension assets already, we have to make sure that we have an independent board of advisors that are managing the assets for the best returns of the ratepayers. Politicians really shouldn't be involved in those decisions.
So referendum is forthcoming?
If we get some positive feedback from Albertans that they want a referendum, we will know very soon. I mean, our first town hall had 12,000 people on it, and we're continuing to get feedback coming in from all sources on the website through our survey. We'll have a pretty good idea of whether Albertans want it to go to a vote, and I'll let the panel finish their work. They're going to report back to us in May, and we'll know what the path forward is at that point.
There are a number of Albertans who are upset that you allegedly dropped your promise to enshrine protections for the unvaccinated in human rights legislation. Now, didn't you actually campaign on that before? Why the change of heart?
It wasn't the right way to do it, and I was persuaded of that by my caucus. I mean, part of what you do when you're a leader is you put forward ideas, and then part of what you do when you become premier is you have to listen to your team around you. And so they wanted us to take a bit more time in looking at the ways that we could do those protections. So I asked Preston Manning if he would do a study on that. It's almost complete. I think he's intending to give me the final report by the middle of November, at which point we'll make it public. And it goes through in great detail. I've asked him through the terms of reference to look at all the ways in which we can make sure that we manage the pandemic in the future better than we did in the past and make sure that we protect rights. But what I will say is that I made it very clear when I got elected that I believe that these are private medical decisions, that people should talk to their doctor, make their own personal choice. It was my expectation that people would not be discriminated against. I made that expectation very clear to my own government, to the business community. And from what I can see, that is being respected in Alberta, and I'm glad for that.
The AHS brought back mask mandates for healthcare facilities across Alberta, including acute care facilities. Many people would argue that the masks, they really don't help much, and people still get the viruses. Your thoughts on the move by AHS?
Well, AHS does operate 106 facilities on our behalf, and they are taking what I think they believe is a measured response in looking at the amount of outbreaks that are happening in a facility. What I would say is anyone should make the choice on whether or not they think a mask is going to be protective to them. But I have told them that my expectation is no patient is going to be denied service. We have to make sure that people get the care that they need. The main thing is we're in respiratory virus season. We've got COVID, we've got influenza, we've got RSV. I think the recommendations still stand. If you're sick, stay home. Make sure that you're washing your hands frequently. Keep socially distanced if you are feeling a bit under the weather, and just make sure you take care of yourself. That's what I think people need to do. And perhaps a mask is an indication that somebody might be a little bit under the weather. So maybe just keep a little bit of distance to keep yourself safe.
The 1 Million March for Children grabbed international headlines. Many people are really upset that SOGI, or sexual orientation and gender identity, is being used by teachers as a tool or resource in schools. Now, SOGI obviously is not part of the Alberta school curriculum. But Premier Smith, let me ask you, will it be in the future?
I'm watching what's happening in other jurisdictions, and I'm very, I'm acknowledging the concern that parents have. Parents, quite rightly, want to be involved in their kids' lives. They don't want secrets being kept from them. At the same time, we also know that kids who are going through a lot of confusion around puberty, gender identity, they also need to feel safe and supported. So we're trying to figure out what the right balance would be and watching what's happening in other jurisdictions to make sure that we are doing any legislation in a way that respects everybody. So we haven't made a decision on that yet. We've got some motions that are going to be debated at our upcoming AGM. We've had caucus discussions. We're seeing what's happening in other jurisdictions, and if we feel like we need to move on legislation, then we'll make that decision at a future point.
We've seen a real housing crisis in many regions of the country, including right here in our province. So what's being done to create more affordable housing so a young family can actually purchase a home of their very own?
We're trying to use two terms. So affordable housing has traditionally meant subsidized housing for our most vulnerable. And we have a number of programs, $1 billion over the next 3 years that we're spending in support of that. But attainable housing is, I think, the other big aspect that we're trying to support, especially when we've seen these rising interest rates and we've seen ballooning housing prices in other parts of the country. We still have a relatively affordable market, but we have to make sure it stays that way because more and more people are coming here. One of the reasons for that is you can actually have the dream of home ownership at a reasonable rate. So we're working with the municipalities to identify ways that we can accelerate those kinds of projects. For instance, and I hope we can hear more of this, I talked to a recent council member in Calgary who told me with 2 transportation projects, if we could partner with them on approving those, that would open up 20,000 lots for development for single-family homes. So I would put the challenge out to Lethbridge, to Medicine Hat, to Red Deer, Grand Prairie, Fort McMurray, Calgary, and Edmonton. If you can come forward with those kinds of project ideas that will really open up the private sector to start accelerating some of that construction, we're here to be a partner.
Alberta Premier Danielle Smith, thanks so much for your time today and for joining us from Calgary.
Well, thanks for having me. Nice to talk to you.
It is so tragic what's been unfolding, not just in Ukraine, but there's also war taking place in Gaza between Hamas and Israel. Thousands of people have been killed and close to 1 million are homeless in the Middle East. Speeches from most of the party leaders here in Canada have shown their support for Israel, but we haven't heard a lot from NDP leader Jagmeet Singh and his party just yet. Now, to chat about this in more detail is political reporter and Sun columnist Brian Lilly, who joins us once again from Toronto. Brian, why are we not hearing from Singh and the NDP?
Well, he was holding his national NDP convention in Hamilton, Ontario over the weekend, and the issue of Israel was one that he was feeling pressure on from part of his base. There's part of the NDP base that simply does not like or support Israel. They see themselves more aligned with the Palestinians, which is normally fine, but in the face of a horrific terrorist attack like what we witnessed over Thanksgiving weekend, you cannot stand with Hamas. And Jagmeet Singh, in his previous statements, has done a very good job of putting out the right words and saying the right things that, he denounces the terrorism. He considers Hamas a terrorist organization. Pretty much everyone but CBC does. We'll get to that in a bit. But, on Monday, it was the first time that the parties and the MPs were assembled in the House of Commons since the terror attacks. After question period, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau stood up and gave a very good speech, about 10 minutes long, where he said, make no mistake, Hamas is a terrorist organization. They are not freedom fighters. They are not a resistance. And he pushed back against, talking points that some within his own party's base would support, that this is a resistance, that these are freedom fighters. Pierre Poilievre stood up, gave a very good speech saying there can be no negotiation with Hamas, that just as President Obama had to destroy Osama bin Laden, Israel has to destroy Hamas, which has been not just a threat to the people of Israel, but to Gaza. Even Yves-François Blanchet, the leader of the Bloc Québécois, made very clear where he stood. But Jagmeet Singh conspicuously wasn't there. It was Edmonton MP for the NDP, Heather McPherson, that stood up. And she gave a pretty good speech, but there are people in the party who have been calling out McPherson since the weekend for being a sellout. So the NDP has an anti-Semitism problem. It has a problem with people who believe that Hamas are freedom fighters, that this is a decolonization struggle. And so all those DEI words that we've been hearing about thrown into training sessions and, into affirmations that are said before meetings, those are coming back to bite the NDP in ways that, for the most part, Jagmeet Singh has done a good job of tamping down on anti-Semitism, just like Jack Layton and Tom Mulcair before him. But it keeps rearing its ugly head, including at the provincial level here in Ontario, where, let's remember, even though they might be the Alberta NDP or the Ontario NDP or the federal, it's one federated party, unlike all the others. They consider themselves one party. So a smear on one is a smear on all.
Brian, the Hamas is listed as a terrorist organization, not only with the Canadian government, but with the Americans, Britain, the EU, Japan, Australia, the list goes on and on. Us here at Bridge City News, we refer to Hamas as a terrorist organization, but many of the mainstream media are still not doing it, including the CBC. Why do you think that is?
CBC has long had a policy of not referring to groups as terrorists, but if you look at their coverage of the attack on the Muslim family, the murder of, I believe it was 4 of 5 members of this Muslim family that was out for a walk in London, Ontario. They described that man who committed those attacks as a terrorist. He's facing terrorism charges. If there's a story about somebody on the far right, they use the terms terrorist without always attributing it to someone else. But when it comes to Hamas, they say, oh no, our policy is we don't call groups terrorist organizations. We let politicians do that, and then we attribute it to them because we should not be making that judgment call. It is clear when you look at what Hamas did over that weekend of attacks that it was terrorism. It defies reason that you wouldn't call it terrorism. So CBC has been facing a lot of pressure. Brodie Fenlon, who's their editor-in-chief, put out a column basically describing why it is. When I first heard that in the hours after the attack that CBC journalists were told, don't call Hamas terrorists, I thought, no, they can't be that bad. I checked it out with a couple of CBC journalists. They said, yeah, no, it's true. Not all of them, by the way, are comfortable with that. Yeah. Some of them are upset at what they have to do, but it is, you have to follow your employer's instructions. And then CBC spokesperson defended it. Now, Brodie Fenlon, they're going to be dragged before a parliamentary committee on this. Deputy Conservative leader Melissa Landsman saying that she wants to hear directly from them in a parliamentary committee, because if you can't call what just happened terrorism, then you've lost the plot.
Brian, we've seen a wide variety of rallies in support of both Hamas and Israel. It appears as though some Liberal MPs are feeling some pressure to kind of downplay the Israeli side and give more emphasis to the Palestinian cause. Have any politicians gone as far as to say Hamas was justified in their attacks?
Not on the Liberal side, and not anyone that I've seen at the federal side. We do have one New Democrat member of the Ontario legislature, an MPP, or as you would call them in Alberta, an MLA, who not only put out a statement that blamed Israel for the attacks, but marched in rallies, or marched in a rally on Thanksgiving Monday, where the anti-Semitic chants and slogans were sung, where they played the sound of the Israeli early warning air raid siren, and then chanted Zionist hide, Zionist hide. She has not been fully called to task for that by her party, or quite frankly, by members of the Queen's Park Press Gallery. But, there's been some statements put out by Liberal MPs that were not fully in line with where their leader stood. And I thought, they're obviously feeling pressure. And if you represent a large Muslim population or a large Arab Canadian population, obviously you're going to feel different pressure than if you represent a large Jewish population. And you have to represent your constituents, and it might be your own viewpoint as well. But thankfully, none of them have gone that far as what we've seen with some politicians, with some union leaders, where they praise the resistance. I can't stress it enough. Kudos to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau for telling people on his side, Hamas is not a resistance movement. They are not freedom fighters, because that's what some of the union leaders, some of the activists, some of the student unions have been putting out there, and it is repugnant that they do so. So let's see how long this solidarity with Israel lasts. My guess is that as Israel begins its ground offensive into Gaza to take out Hamas, which they must do, that some of that support is going to crumble, because Israel is going to defend itself. And, people will say Israel has a right to defend itself. And then when it does, they'll say, oh, but not that way. No, Israel has the right to defend itself. If it was a proportionate attack, if they did the same things to Hamas that Hamas did to Israel, I would be rightly outraged. They're going to take more care, more caution than that.
Now, there have been calls to ban or criminalize the glorification of terrorism and many of these rallies across Canada supporting Hamas. Brian, will we actually see legislation introduced to see this come to fruition?
I don't think so. And to be quite frankly, I hope not. Not because I support what these people are saying, but because I do believe in freedom of speech, freedom of expression. And if somebody holds that view, I want to know who they are so that I can denounce them. I've been calling for people to shun those who back Hamas. I've been saying that you are no longer welcome in polite society. And just like we wouldn't treat a politician or a union leader or a university student union president with any respect if they were holding Nazi rallies, we shouldn't have any respect for them or treat them with any respect or deference if they are out there supporting Hamas. We should shun them. We should ostracize them. Criminalizing them, though, I'm a bit concerned about. When the government starts deciding who can say what and when, that is a very slippery slope. And we saw just a little while ago that the Trudeau government wanted to criminalize any questioning of, what did they call it, the denialism of the grave sites at residential schools. And then, there were searches done of some of the ground where people had said ground-penetrating radar had found graves, and they said, oh, there's no graves there. It's not that there were no graves or no deaths. We know that that happened, but that some of the claims that had been made may not be accurate. And the government wanted to criminalize anyone questioning that. I think that's a dangerous place to go on that front. I think it'd be dangerous to go on this front. There was a young woman who appeared at a rally in a suburb of Toronto over the weekend saying that Hamas is a resistance movement and they're justified in everything they do. And she said this while wearing machine gun earrings. Well, her interview was broadcast and now she's unemployed. So she's faced consequences for her glorification of terrorism. We need more of that. I'm not sure that going the criminal route is actually the best route. If you're going to advocate violence, then sure, we should be looking at criminalizing advocating violence. But I'm uncomfortable on this other topic.
Now, there's still a number of Canadians in Israel, Brian. How are evacuation plans coming along?
Well, they were a bit slow in getting going. We had the whole issue of the government saying the embassy was open when it wasn't. Not sure why they lied about that when they knew the truth would come out. They didn't pre-position a plane in Athens or Cyprus like they should have ahead of time, but they have run several flights in and out now. People who are in the West Bank are now exiting into Jordan. They're able to get on flights over to Athens and then from Athens home. So that's good. Getting people out of Gaza is the tough part, though. We've evacuated many, hundreds from Israel. And then there are some who have decided that they're going to stay, people who are joining up with the IDF reserves and such. But Canadians who are in Gaza, they are in a very difficult situation. Israel is telling people in Gaza to move to the southern part of the Gaza Strip. Hamas is saying, don't you dare, and basically trying to block people in because they want to use the civilian populations as human shields, as cannon fodder, if you will. So getting Canadians out of there is a very difficult task, and I'm not sure what the government's going to do. And it's hard to criticize them on it because everyone else is trying to get their foreign nationals out and having no luck because of Hamas.
Let's switch gears for just a moment here, Brian. The Supreme Court of Canada recently ruled that the Impact Assessment Act, also known as Bill C-69 or the No More Pipelines Law, was found to be unconstitutional. But it wasn't struck down. So what's the difference and what comes next?
So this was a reference case by the Alberta government, supported by, I believe, every provincial and territorial government in the country, because while it was dubbed the No More Pipelines Act, it was really the No More Anything Act. Scott Moe in Saskatchewan, as I've told you before, he was trying to build a small gas-powered electrical generating station to work as backup baseload power for a wind and solar project. And the federal government was still fighting him on that. He's trying to build wind and solar, but you need the baseload power. And they were saying, no, you can't do that. Here in Ontario, they're trying to stop a highway a provincial highway. When did the federal government get involved in that? Or they've tried to stop housing projects. They wanted to be the zoning department. So every premier across the country backed Alberta in this fight. And so because it was a reference case, the law wasn't struck down, but the Supreme Court did say that it is largely unconstitutional in how they go about deciding which projects to assess and how they're assessing them, that it goes beyond the Section 91, Section 92 division of powers outlined in the Constitution. I'm surprised that they went there. I'm glad that they did, because this law was clearly an egregious violation of the Constitution when it comes to who is responsible for what. The federal government decided they wanted to usurp the powers of provincial governments, even municipal governments, on what could be built and where, in ways that the founding fathers of Confederation would have found unbelievable, abhorrent and unbelievable. But they went there. So what comes next? They can't apply it the way they have been, but I think what we're going to see is the Trudeau government try and rescue as much as they can. But there are parameters from this decision. It wasn't unanimous. That doesn't mean it doesn't stand, though. And if the federal government continues to try and push through in ways that the court has said they can't do, well, then expect more court fights. This has cost the economy of Canada billions and billions of dollars. The billions just in lost investment in the Alberta oil sands, but also in industries and developments straight across the country. This was a horrible bill, horrible law. I'm glad the court found the way that it did.
You know, I watched an interview with Federal Environment Minister Stephen Guilbeault about the ruling from the Supreme Court of Canada, 5-2 striking down Bill C-69, essentially, like you said, saying it's unconstitutional. He referred to the matter as the opinions of the judges, not the ruling of the judges.
Yeah, well, the Liberals like to say that conservatives don't respect the judiciary, that they don't respect the courts, and then this is how they act when a ruling they don't like comes out. It's like when a news report reports something the government doesn't like. They call it misinformation, disinformation, or they claim that the report in the Globe this morning was false.
Political reporter and Sun columnist Brian Lilley, thanks so much for joining us today from Toronto.
Thank you, Hal. On
behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless and thanks for watching.